Breonna Taylor, the Breonna Taylor cop trial. Scapegoat or criminal? Well, we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more on this week's Charlie Crimebuster. Charlie Crimebuster on what some people are calling, well, the fastest minutes in podcasting. Well, hello and welcome. Well, this past week, Officer Hankinson, he was on trial for wanton endangerment times 3. This is for shooting into the apartment of Breonna Taylor. Now, those bullets found their way into the backside of Taylor's apartment. Interesting enough, there were other cops' bullets that found their way into another apartment, and also other cops' bullets that tragically found their way into the body of Breonna Taylor. Yet, neither of those were charged criminally with anything. So let me ask you this. Were these charges against Hankinson, were they justified charges? Or was he just set up to be the scapegoat into a blotched police raid? Well, we're going to talk about that today. But first, let me again say welcome to any and all the new listeners. And hello again to many of our regular friends that listen every single week. We really do appreciate you. So I'd like to invite you to check out our website, charliecrimebuster.com. Or if you'd like to email me directly, email me at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. We do appreciate your comments, and we welcome your suggestions, even the differences of opinions about the cases we discuss. Again, now you can reach me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, by the way, please take a look at the new project underway. We're taking feedback now. That new project gives you an opportunity to be a part of something larger than ourselves. An opportunity for you to show your support to our true heroes. You know, I do appreciate the skills of others who are like in performing arts, actors and such. And I especially appreciate the skills of athletes, all those who entertain us. But my friend, our real heroes are those who put their life on the line in real-time threats. Our law enforcement, our first responders, and the military. And the Peacemaker Network, well, we're developing that right now to support these brave men and women. You can check it out at peacemakernetwork.com. That's peacemakernetwork.com. Now, this past week, there was another high-profile trial that took place. You see, there was a former police detective who was involved in the raid that led to the shooting death of Breonna Taylor. That's in Louisville, Kentucky, back in March of 2020. Well, that detective, he was found not guilty, 30, of charges related to the 10 bullets that he fired on that terrible, tragic morning. Brett Hankinson, that's the detective. And he was the only officer from the raid who was charged with a crime, though his charges were not related to Taylor's death. He faced 3 counts of wanton endangerment. This was after shooting into a glass door and window in Taylor's home. You see, the bullets went through Taylor's apartment and through a wall that is shared with another unit. Now, this trial, it had to be pushed back from spring of 2021 because of a case backlog. Of course, that was caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the death of 26-year-old Taylor, she was an emergency room technician, and along with the death of George Floyd and others, all that sparked nationwide protests in 2020, led to changes in policing policy and laws. But here today, we're going to take a look at the raid, Taylor's death, and its aftermath. First, let's talk about that raid. It was on March the 12th, 2020, a Jefferson County Circuit Court judge, that judge approved 5 search warrants for locations that were all linked to Taylor's ex-boyfriend, Breonna Taylor's ex-boyfriend. He was a convicted felon, and he was suspected, pretty well proven, that he supplied a local drug house. One of those locations in those search warrants was Breonna Taylor's residence. So on the early hours of March the 13th, Hankinson and the other officers, they executed a warrant at Taylor's apartment. Taylor, she was in bed with her boyfriend, a new one this time, a new boyfriend by the name of Kenneth Walker III. That's when the officers announced their presence. Then they battered down the front door. And according to Walker, Taylor and Walker yelled to ask who was at the door, but got no response. That's what Walker said afterward. But now there's something else about Walker you need to know. We'll talk about that a little later. But he said they were thinking they were intruders, and so Walker, he grabbed his Glock and fired a shot when the officers made entry. That shot struck Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly, shot him in the leg, severed a major artery. And this, in turn, it triggered a volley of fire from the officers. Taylor, by the way, who was standing in the hallway with Walker, she was shot multiple times. But amazingly, Walker was not injured. On the 911 call, he said somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend. Now, it was reported that Hankinson had been standing outside the apartment, and Hankinson was accused of blindly firing through a door and window. His bullets entered a neighboring apartment, where a pregnant woman, a man, and a child were home. That was according to the state attorney general. Now, that was the way that the prosecution presented it to the jury. However, my friend, this past week, the jury, they did not buy that presentation. After weighing the evidence, the jury believed the defense. The defense had stated that Hankinson was in line to enter the apartment. He was under fire. He realized his fellow officers were in what we in law enforcement know as the, quote, fatal funnel. While he was in that fatal funnel about to make entry, he realized what was going on. He pivoted around, and he returned fire through the sliding glass doors in the bedroom window to stop the threat to his fellow officers. Now, Walker, the guy who fired the first shot to the police officers, he was at first charged with attempted murder of a police officer and first-degree assault. That was when Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly, of course, was shot in the leg. However, prosecutors later decided to drop those charges. Now, none of those police officers were wearing body cameras. Wasn't all that many people wearing them those days. And there was no video of the night Taylor bled to death in her hallway. Hankinson, he was fired from the police department in late June 2020. And the two other officers, Mattingly and Detective Miles Cosgrove, they were not indicted. Then the Kentucky Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, he said they were justified in shooting in self-defense because Taylor's boyfriend fired first. Now, there were no drugs found in the apartment, and Taylor's family and their attorney have maintained that she was not involved in any way in her ex-boyfriend's alleged drug deals. Now, this shooting was at first, believe it or not, largely unnoticed, except locally, but then it became a very big deal. And we're going to tell you all about that in a moment. But now it's time for our, what we call here at Charlie Crimebuster, our Courageous Citizen of the Week story. And interesting enough, this story comes from the same area of our main focus today, right there in the state of Kentucky. And there in Kentucky, one man's attention to detail, it helped save a 6-year-old girl from the clutches of a kidnapper who had grabbed this girl in public. Princess Weatherford, he was outside his home in Louisville, Kentucky, when he saw something very shocking. Weatherford saw a 6-year-old girl on her bike when all of a sudden a stranger came over to her, threw her into his car. He just walked up, grabbed her by the collar, picked her up off a bike, and then tossed her in the passenger seat. That's what Weatherford had told Inside Edition. Without hesitation and with pure motivation, Weatherford, he then jumped into his own vehicle. He sped after the kidnapper. He wasn't able to catch him, but he did manage to recall some of the license plate, as well as the car model, a Dodge Challenger. We lost him and ran into one of the police officers. That's when I gave him the last 3 digits of the license plate. That's what Weatherford told Inside Edition. The Louisville Metro Police Department, that's the same department, by the way, that was involved in the Taylor raid, they joined the hunt for the kidnapper, and they quickly found him. In just 10 minutes, the police pulled over the kidnapper, yanked the young girl out of the car, all thanks to Weatherford's actions that day. It was extremely important. That's what Jason Burba said of Weatherford's help in the case. He said the partial plate and the overall description of the car, which was really specific, well, we were able to find the vehicle all because of that. Now, as we've often said here at Charlie Crimebuster, it is the situational awareness and paying attention to details that helps solve problems and saves lives. Learn to do that. You see, don't be so tied to your own digital devices that you're unsafe to others and those around you. Now, thank God he was alert and he responded. He had the courage to get out and try to chase down this guy. Well, when the word got out about the kidnapping and Weatherford's help, the members of the community, they all started calling him a hero. But that's not a title that Weatherford says that he feels he deserves. He went on to say, "Thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it. I just hope you guys would do the same in that situation." Princess Weatherford says that. So, my friend, let me remind you that not every hero has superpowers or wears a cape. Being heroic, well, it means sometimes making smart decisions at the right time, being alert, displaying integrity, and helping others who need it. In that sense, my friend, Weatherford, well, he's certainly a hero, and his actions helped save the young girl. Those actions are inspiring to us all, and that's why Prentice Weatherford, there in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, he is indeed what we call our Charlie Crimebuster's Courageous Citizen of the Week. Well, now back to our main focus, the protests. You see, Taylor's death, it did at first, well, it went largely unnoticed outside of Louisville. CNN, well, they covered the story for the first time on May the 13th in 2020. Now, interesting enough, that was 2 weeks before George Floyd died. And by the end of May, well, Walker's distress 911 call from the night that Taylor had died, well, it had been released nationally. You see, Floyd had died days earlier at the hands of the police in Minneapolis. Meanwhile, then, there were protests, and more protests. Those protests in Louisville turned violent, with gunfire erupting during the protests. Actually, 7 people were shot downtown overnight on May the 28th. Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher, he said that the shots were fired from within the crowd, but not from the police. Well, in July, the protesters marched to Cameron's front lawn, and 87 people were arrested for criminal trespass. Among other charges, in September, protests began to take place nightly in Louisville. That was after a grand jury did not charge the other police officers involved in Taylor's death. They indicted only Hankinson. By then, well, Taylor's name was known nationally and beyond, just like Floyd's was. And her death was a central part of the protests, well, the ones that rocked the country throughout much of 2020. Celebrities even got involved in it, and they took up the subject of Taylor's death, including NBA star LeBron James, Oprah Winfrey, who actually put Taylor on the front of her magazine. Now, it is sometimes difficult to find facts when there's so much emotion on the surface of such events. But the first question that comes to mind is this. It's about the search warrant itself. Did the police have probable cause to search the premise of Breonna Taylor? Well, here, my friend, what some people do not know, here are some of the reasons the police were at Breonna's apartment in the first place. You see, the investigation's primary targets, well, they were a guy by the name of Jamarcus Glover and Adrian Walker. Now, Walker was not related to Kenneth Walker, who was Breonna's new boyfriend at the time. You see, these guys, Glover and Aaron Walker, well, they were drug dealers, and they were selling controlled substance from a drug house. That drug house was just approximately 10 miles away from Breonna Taylor's house. You see, Glover and Breonna Taylor, had been in an in-and-off relationship. It started way back in 2016 and lasted all the way up to February 2020. Then that's when Taylor, well, she got committed to the other guy by the name of Kenneth Walker. In fact, my friend, back on December the 16th, now get this, there was a guy by the name of Fernandez Bowman. And he, now get this, was found dead in a car that was rented by Breonna Taylor and was used by Glover. He, Bowman, had been shot 8 times. Now, Glover also had used Breonna Taylor's address and phone number for various purposes, including his bank statements. Glover had even told another person that Taylor was holding money from him, that money which had been received from his drug dealing. He stated that Breonna Taylor had about $8,000 of his at the present time of this raid. Now, Glover, he had also received packages there at Taylor's home, including one very recently, that he had received actually back in January 2020 at Taylor's home. And he took that package and took it to the house, that house where he and his partner were dealing drugs. So think about this. Wonder why the police were there at Breonna Taylor's apartment that night? Well, number one, she had rented a car for her drug-dealing boyfriend in which a man was found dead. That man had been shot 8 times. Number two, she held on to drug money that was received from illegal dealing of drugs. Whether she knew it or not, she had that money. Number three, her drug-dealing boyfriend, well, he received packages at her house. You see, it is MO. It is the method of operation for a lot of drug-dealing people to get their mail and their packages at someone else's address. And remember, as early as January 2020, well, Glover had left Taylor's apartment with an unknown package, presumed to be drugs, took it to his known drug house, and he used her address for a number of different reasons. So you see, there was probable cause to search Breonna's apartment on March the 13th. Now, in fairness, Glover said that she was not involved in this actual dealing of the drugs, but there is plenty of reasonable suspicious cause to search Miss Taylor's residence. Back on March 13, 2020, the warrant to search Miss Taylor's residence, again, it was one of about 5 warrants. 5 warrants to be served on this sweep, and it appeared that the investigation, well, it was just about to get wrapped up with these searches. And of all the searches that night, of all of those that night, well, the one the authorities believed would have the least risk, well, it was a search of Breonna's apartment. They were simply looking for documents, maybe some money, or maybe even drugs that might be in packages there that was tied to Glover. They did not know that she had a new boyfriend staying in the apartment that night who actually had a weapon. Now, there were also some other things that was not known that night as well. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. But now it is indeed time for our Crazy Crook story. There's the sound for the Crazy Crook story. Well, this one, well, we all know that in doing robberies, one of the most important parts of robbery is to hide your real identity, disguise yourself, or your real face, or go ahead with a fake look that no one can identify. Well, this man in our Crazy Crook story, he was probably one of the world's dumbest criminals who took the help of a fake identity, but my friend, he did not use that fake identity very wisely. You see, he needed a good disguise so that no one would doubt his identity. But Dennis Hawkins, well, he seemed a little weak in hiding his real face. Dennis, he picked up a blonde, big wig. He had fake breasts, and he had clown pants. Get that. Blonde wig, fake breasts, and clown pants. What a pair that is. So this really got a pretty easy look for police to find out the real face. That it was Mr. Hawkins, who had tried to fool others, but he was just fooling himself in looking like a woman, because my friend, along with that blonde wig, along with those clown pants, those fake breasts, he didn't even get rid of his mustache and his goatee, and that really made finding his exact identity through the cameras, well, it made it pretty doggone easy. And then once police found his identity, well, they released that through the camera through the entire city. And then a gas station attendant, well, he informed police about this strange-looking guy trying to steal a car. And so later the police, they found him. Yep, they found him complete with his red clown pants. And they identified that it was Hawkins. And now Hawkins, he becomes just another crazy crook that we feature here on Charlie Crimebuster. That is indeed our crazy crook story of the week. Now, back to the main focus of our podcast today. Just as police did not know Breonna Taylor's new boyfriend was in the apartment that night with a loaded Glock, there were other things that was not known about this case. One thing that was not known was that Detective Hankinson's, that his rounds that were discharged that night, they were not the only ones that passed through the target's apartment into another apartment. There was another officer's rounds. Well, it passed up into the above apartment as well. Yet that officer was not charged with wanton endangerment as Officer Hankinson. The grand jury said, well, they were justified because they were under fire. Well, Hankinson was under fire too, but I guess they overlooked that. Next, while most people know that Breonna Taylor's family received $12 million settlement from the department and the city, well, the other couple whose apartment was behind Taylor's and in which rounds passed from Detective Hankinson's weapon, well, they're also suing the city for millions of dollars. Thankfully, no one was injured with those rounds flying through the air. But you see, that, my friend, is being pursued in civil court. And in my opinion, that's where this case should have been pursued, not criminal court. Hankinson, my friend, it's just as simple as this. Hankinson was indeed a scapegoat. He was not a criminal. You see, another thing that people may not know is that Wright, you remember Wright, the guy, the new boyfriend of Taylor? Well, he who shot that shot with his Glock weapon that started this whole situation, well, when he first came out of the apartment that night into police custody, get this, he tried to pin the shot that was fired on his dead girlfriend, Breonna Taylor. He told him that Taylor fired the shot. Maybe because of this lie was why the prosecution did not choose, they chose not rather, to put Wright on the witness stand. Can you imagine that? Makes you wonder what else he may have lied about that night and why he really shot out at police in the first place. Well, there's another thing that most people do not realize is that while it was pointed out on the stand that Detective Hankinson, well, that he had actually aced the last qualifying on the range. He was a good shot. He knew what he was doing with a weapon. And they say he should have known, I guess they should have known this supernaturally, that there's only one person fired at him, despite the fact with the chaos and rounds being fired all over the place, over 30 rounds being shot at the same time. My friend, I got news for you. No amount of training, no matter how good you are on the firing range, can really prepare you for what happens when you find your fellow officers in the fatal funnel, and one of those officers are already gunned down by gunshot, and you're trying to get him and others out of that funnel. My friend, you do what you possibly can as quickly as you possibly can to save yourself and others. You do not have time to assess the incident as you and others would like for you to do so. Officer Hankinson, according to his testimony, he saw a muzzle flash. He saw the silhouette of a person holding a weapon and firing. He actually even thought it was a rifle by the way it sounded. He did what he could to possibly stop a threat against himself and fellow officers that night. You see, it's difficult to me to understand how they found that the other fellows and the other officers there who returned gunfire that night, including the gunfire that killed Breonna Taylor, if they find that those officers were justified in their actions, and yet they could then turn around and charge Officer Hankinson that night, who was doing the very same thing, defending himself. You see, here's what happened. Here's what really happened. The department and the prosecutor, under intense political pressure, Well, authorities, it's just as simple as this. They use Officer Hankinson as a scapegoat. Someone had to be blamed. And instead of blaming officers for a poorly planned police raid, yet there was probable cause for searching the apartment, but the way the raid was planned by others, I'm not talking about the officers that were on the raid, but those that planned that raid, well, it was very poorly planned. My friend, the blame should have went there. There, instead of treating an officer who was doing his job the way he had been trained, who acted out of loyalty, courage, and a sense of duty, well, they treated Hankinson like a criminal. He lost his job. He was arrested. He was put on trial. Well, that should not have happened. He was a scapegoat. And thank God the jury, a jury of his peers who saw the facts as they were, they did not go along with this modern-day attempt to switch the blame that day. Now, my friend, as in most of these cases, again, there are no winners here. A young lady died tragically in the prime of her lives. Lives and families will never be the same again. Well, there are some improvements, especially coming with the so-called knock warrants. Now, this was a no-knock warrant, but it was not served as a no-knock warrant. Instead, they served it as announce their presence warrant that night. Announce and enter. And they did announce their presence that night. Now, I do believe that there is a time for no-knock warrants. They should be served when you're facing a dangerous drug dealer or dealers who are armed to the teeth. Those who would rather go out in a blaze of gunfire. At that point, you need to use a no-knock warrant. No warrant should be served, in my opinion, while people are sleeping in their beds who are not considered dangerous. You see, if my doors are knocked down in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping, well, I may or may not hear the word police, search warrant yelled out. If I do not hear that, then probably my instinct for survival would lead me to my weapon to protect my family. I can only hope I would recognize it as a police raid before I reacted to armed people coming into my home. Now remember also, another mistake, these were plainclothes detectives making this entry. They weren't SWAT. These guys had no uniforms, and my friend, that was not helpful. We have, in fact, on Charlie Crimebuster, we produce an episode on how to tell the difference of a police raid and a home invasion in case that happens to you. That episode can be found on charliecrimebuster.com. You see, my friend, officers could have just as easily that day used common sense, waited till Miss Taylor was coming home from work, met her right there at her apartment, with search warrant in hand, walked into the apartment with her, and conducted their search. If they had done that, this would have turned out much, much differently. There is a time for a raid such as that was. There is a time when you need to go in the middle of the night or middle of the morning, but this one was not the time, the place, or the way to conduct that raid. My friend, hopefully, from these series of high-profile trials, well, those trials that unfortunately has in the wake of it left bodies of innocent people. Hopefully through all of this, we're going to learn some lessons to keep us safer. And keep in mind also that today it's more difficult than ever to be in law enforcement. These brave men and women, while mistakes are made, and sometimes there are bad apples in every orchard, there are very few of those mistakes and very few of those bad apples. And now, it seems like the whole department, the whole army of brave men and women are under attack. Even over this past week, there were 2 officers that were shot. Now get this. This past week, 2 officers were shot as they stood in line at a hot dog stand. Just their mere presence invoked such an attack. Officers today are persecuted, prosecuted, and executed. So in this day and time, join with us in supporting them, other first responders, and the military. Go today to peacemakernetwork.com. That's peacemakernetwork.com, and become a part of the solution, not the problem. Show your help to these brave men and women. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be alert, be safe, for indeed, the life you save, well, it may be your very own.